and my son has every right to receive compensation for what was done to him. So then when they found out, once I had this x-ray from the University of Washington, that's when I started having even more groups banning me and working against me. And then the other thing that occurred was then they had people in, like police officers, working against me. I didn't know at the time that Tina Thornton again was my social worker. I didn't know that her husband was a cop. Well, a cop from that area. So let's think. Stacy Stubblefield's husband is also a cop. Oh yeah, and cops were standing by while I got raped. So there's a lot of really nice cops in Wenatchee and Chelan Douglas County, right? Okay, so my social worker's husband is a police officer that most likely worked with, and I believe he did work with, Stacy Stubblefield's husband, the midwife who did these damages and who I was going to sue. The next thing, and here's Dr. Butler talking to Brett McDonald, Tina Thornton's best friend, about getting my records. And Brett McDonald doesn't want me to talk about the FBI at all. Because they're the good guys, right? Because the FBI shouldn't be named under any circumstances for anything wrong. So this is like classic collusion. And the next thing that happened is I stupidly said something to Tina Thornton, to Tina Thornton alone, in a visit with her, because I had to meet with her every now and then. And she said, how are things going? And, you know, how are the finances? Can you make it to these different medical appointments? And because I only had a certain amount of money, they said that in order to, since you have to go out of the area for these doctor appointments, because I'd been banned locally, they said that the state of Washington was going to pay for my driving expenses. They would pay for my gas and my mileage, because they were making that a requirement in order to keep this TANF money. And in the meantime, I wasn't a bump on a log. I mean, I had a plan and an idea of things that I was going to do to help get my son and I ahead. And people knew that I had a plan and an idea because I had a lot of experience as a nanny. And I went to the state offices, which is actually where CPS is. CPS and child care, where you get licensing for starting a child care, they're in the same building. And I went to that building and I inquired and asked for information and materials about starting a licensed daycare, because my plan was to get back into college, take night courses from home, if necessary, while my son Oliver was still at home with me, and get my license. There was no reason why I couldn't have my license in to start a small daycare. And I was thinking of having, you know, just my son and maybe between 2 and 4 other kids, very small. And I had all kinds of ideas. I was kind of thinking of doing like a charter school type of a preschool, where I had a lot of educational things planned and, you know, kind of like a preschool, but even earlier than preschool for some of the kids. And that's what I wanted to do during the day, and it'd be a source of income. And then at night I was going to go to college. So I was obstructed from doing that because I started getting harassed even more severely, of course. And I remember I said to Tina Thornton one day when she was asking me how I was doing, something about, well, I said something to her, I think that my driver's license, or my driver's insurance for my driving insurance might be expired, because I said it was with my parents, and I think it might be expired, but I'm not sure, but I don't know. And I think I basically told her I thought it was expired and I was going to have to get, or it would be expired, and I'd have to renew it. I believe what I told her, and it was wrong. I was actually covered by insurance for several months after that, and I didn't realize it. But I had said something to her about how I thought my driving insurance was going to be expired unless I had money to pay for it. Or it was expired and I had to pay for it. I don't remember. I think I said that it was very close to being expired. And they knew that I didn't have any income. They knew I wasn't getting help financially from family or from anyone else giving me money. And she asked that question. And the next thing that happened is I started getting pulled over by police all the time. Right after I talked to Tina Thornton about this driving insurance matter. I was pulled over and my car searched, and I was asked to provide my insurance, proof of insurance, probably 30 times. And the officers did not document every time that I was pulled over. And if they had, it would show up in the record as very clear harassment. I mean, people would have to ask, looking at the police records, why I was being pulled over so many times. I mean, either I'm a crazy driver and I suddenly just lost a couple screws in my head, or the police were harassing me. And they were harassing me. I would probably less than 10 of the, I think probably less than 3 of the times I was, or maybe 3 times I was documented as having police pull me over and ask for my driver's license and registration. They were basically claiming that I was making wrong turns, that I was speeding, that I didn't have the right lights, that something looked dim. They were approaching me when I was already parked in a parking lot. They approached me when I was coming out of stores. They pulled me over in the middle of picking up food for my son. And every single time that they did this, every single time, I wasn't doing anything illegal. And the only reason that they claimed that they lied and said I was doing something illegal is because they wanted to ask for my driving insurance, because they were hoping to catch me on that. They thought if we can catch her on not having driving insurance or having it expired, they thought then they could make sure that I lost my license and I couldn't drive anywhere to get medical care for my son, and therefore I wouldn't be meeting the requirements for TANF, for the small amount of money we had. And then if I didn't have TANF, how could I support my son? So then of course the state could then take my son and say that the excuse is that I'm unable to support my son at all, and I'm just some crazy woman who doesn't get along with anybody. So I knew as soon as the police, after maybe the 10th time that I was pulled over by police, and having them excitedly, really anticipating finding me without any driving insurance, and seeing the expressions on their face when I gave them, they kind of disgruntled, when I gave them this insurance proof, I knew Tina Thornton had said something. She basically was a social worker who was trying to entrap me. She was not a good woman, and I believe she's a Protestant. That doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything just because someone says that they are one religion or the other. Her husband was a cop. So I'm sure Tina Thornton told her cop husband, who told Stacy Stubblefield's husband, the cop, and they basically all decided to gang up on me and try to get me on something. So that was when an extraordinary amount of illegal search and seizure, illegal search was being done. You know, all kinds of false complaints from police, you know, claiming that, you know, I'd done something wrong. So finally, I was in Lake Chelan on one occasion where this happened again. I was pulled over again after making a legal turn. This officer pulled me over and he tried to get me on, he mainly just wanted to see if I had my driving license, or not license, insurance. And I provided it to him, and then he dropped everything. So these cops were not documenting the fact they were even pulling me over. They were just lying and finding excuses to pull me over, and then they wanted to turn it into something if they caught me without insurance. And so at that point, he said, when that happened in Lake Chelan, I had this feeling that there was a camera at that intersection that would document the fact that I was legally making a turn and I was pulled over by police on a harassment basis. So I sent several emails to the city of Lake Chelan asking where their cameras were located on the road and which businesses were there, and I did some investigative research and found out exactly which place it was that had the camera that would show my location at the time that I was being falsely pulled over by an officer. And I had to talk to people at their corporate offices and everything, and I was making requests to get a hold of that documentation because I was going to prove, in the same way that I was given a false parking ticket in Portland, Oregon, and I had to document it with photographs, and then this whole matter disappeared in the courthouse. That happened in Portland, Oregon. I was then going to document the fact that I was being harassed by police and pulled over for things I didn't do wrong. And I was going to obtain this video camera surveillance and prove it. So I knew what, I know what is needed in order to prove a case and to prove something. I know what kind of evidence would be needed. And they knew I knew. So I got harassed even more, and about that time, my son and I were then really being tortured, literally by technology, military technology, and NASA. And so here I was being harassed all the time. I knew that Tina Thornton was a bad person at that point. And then all of a sudden, she was making a complaint. She came up with this idea, well, and then I'm going to talk about, I think, the kind of torture that then they were using against me and my son on Met House Street, probably a month or two or a few months after they first started the car vandalisms up again. First they did that, then they started targeting us at our home with technology on Met House. And then it got even worse when we moved to East Wenatchee, to a different location. And I need to address that use of technology and the kind of torture that my son and I suffered at that point. And then I also need to address, actually I believe that before we were assaulted with the technology, I had this fair hearing, administrative hearing with the state of Washington, because to try to take my son from me and keep me from filing a lawsuit for him and myself. All of a sudden the state knew that I only had so much money, and my social worker knew I only had a little bit. And they knew that I was being told I had to go to these doctor's appointments, which were in Seattle. They scheduled them in Seattle. So I was having to drive all the way to the University of Washington for these appointments. And they were telling me they had promised and agreed to reimburse me for my mileage and gas. They did that the first time. The first time that I submitted how much money was spent, or how much, what visit we went to and everything, they gave me a check right away. So after they gave me this first check, I had no reason to think that they would then later refuse to pay me. I mean, they're a state office, right? So you think they're government, and if they already demonstrated that they have this agreement with you, and then they've demonstrated they're following through on their part by giving you a check for those expenses that you have to be reimbursed for, or else you can't pay your rent, because they know you're only getting enough to barely pay your rent. So clearly that's showing that they are doing what they said they do. So I had no reason to think that then they were going to stiff me on not paying me and reimbursing me after they had me drive out of the area and spend money.